doesn't show up nearly as well as I thought it would. Okay, hello. So, for those of you who have had class with me, I'm going to sound like a broken record. If you could all move in closer to the edges, it will ensure that should anyone come in a few moments late, they don't have to troop down and sit awkwardly in the front row, or make you stand up and like shuffle over and, get an odd look at their butts, right? So this is really a service for yourselves and your classmates, not just for me and my need for tidy order. Yes, so people sitting on the edge, right? Move closer. I see some gaps, right? Okay. I tried. That's really all that can happen. Excellent. So this is an optional seminar, right? That's part of a series of kind of ways to help you think, plot, and plan for your dissertation, right? Because that's a looming project that contributes quite a bit towards your overall mark in your degree. And it's a very exciting process. I love research, and I love research methods. That's why I got a PhD. So, the next few slides have a lot of text on them, right? So don't worry about memorizing everything that is written down and kind of thinking that you have to hold on to that and never let it go. Right, they're there for you, right, to look for and look back on over the next few months as you're developing your research question, right, and starting your literature review, right, as a sort of reference guide. And Ruffle has uploaded these into Keats, so you will have access to them, right. So, also, for those of you who have had classes with me, you know that I'm a huge fan of learning outcomes because it keeps me honest and it makes sure. See, you're laughing, but you know it's true. The only thing that's missing from this slide is a picture of my cats. You'll have to actually take the class with me to appreciate the glory of my fuzzy fur babies. But the point is, right, we have 3 learning outcomes today, and this is so that you can evaluate whether or not you've actually learned something, and it keeps me on track and helps me plan what I'm doing, much like a well-organized essay. So first, you will be familiar with the process of writing a research question. And I chose the word process on purpose. It takes time to write a research question, and you should be constantly thinking about whether or not there's a more effective way to express what you want to learn. Now, you guys have 9 months to work on your dissertation questions and topics and all of these things. Keep in mind it took me 4 years to write 3 research questions that I explored and analyzed through my doctoral work. So, you will also have strategies for identifying key words in your research question, right? We write these questions so that we can express what we want to learn, and by doing that, we're choosing terminology, right, that we think conveys meaning and helps us articulate to an audience of strangers often, right, what we are going to be doing. You can use all of that hard work and expressing yourself clearly to search for information, right? This is one of my favorite things to think about and learn about. And I hope you're all placing bets on whether or not I'm going to fall over this chair at some point during this lecture, right? Keep you all entertained and on your toes here, right? You will also be prepared to practice techniques for using keywords to search for appropriate information resources using Google, as well as the ever-so-friendly, obtuse, convoluted, and nearly impossible to navigate Mon Library. Have any of you tried to use the Mon Library? Yeah? How many of you actually enjoyed that process? I want to capture that look on your face. Now, how many of you have just kind of given up and been like, Google will find it for me? I have a PhD. Like, literally, I know I keep saying I have a PhD, but I literally have a PhD in libraries, and I do not use the Mon Library's website unless I have to. And there's a reason for this, and this is kind of spoiling the plot here. Google Scholar uses the index, right, and all of the metadata created by the Mon library to find things that the Mon library has in its collection. So when you use Google, you're actually searching the Mon. Yeah? So you don't have to feel bad. It's great. Yeah. So anyway, one of the great things about today. So as a kind of quick check-in, how many of you completed a dissertation as part of your undergraduate degrees? Yeah? Ooh, lovely. So you're all familiar with the kind of joys and pains and wonderful things that, vaguely at least. And how many of you have an idea of what you would like to investigate during this current MA dissertation? Yeah? Ooh, better than last year. There was like 2 people who were kind of like nope, none of my friends put the hand down, right? Okay. So you guys are ahead of this. And how many of you have started writing questions, right, or trying to articulate questions based on what you would like to investigate? Ooh, still better than last year. Excellent. Yeah? Okay. And then how many of you have used the Mon library for research? Not the building, right? Not going there and be like, ooh, look, it's quiet. But spoken to a librarian, or what I usually do, write down a call number and then get lost somewhere on a mezzanine and ask a janitor for help to find books. Yeah? This is excellent. Good. How many of you plan on going back? Okay, this is great. I do have to say, right, and this will be a kind of recurring theme throughout my talk for the next hour, right, the librarians in the Mon are some of the best librarians I've ever worked with. They are incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly enthusiastic, and they have a range of disciplinary expertise, right, and they have a really close working relationship with faculties, right, across King's College. So I encourage you, right, as you're going through this process of writing your research questions, looking for, books and journal articles, figuring out the difference between a database and a journal, all of these great things, don't hesitate to ask the librarians in the Mon for help. They are wonderful human beings, and you will literally become an example that they flaunt at faculty education meetings to be like, students do ask questions and they use our services. Some of them even know what they want. Right? This is great. So you too can become a justification for my profession, and it will be wonderful. So there are some things that we need to think about, right, as we prepare to write a research question. And a lot of these are going to seem very obvious. Yeah. So we're going to be adding some nuance, right, to what we already know. Yeah. So please don't throw things at me if I start sounding passionate. It really is just general enthusiasm that I have for research methods. Right? So generally, a research question expresses what we intend to investigate. Yeah? That you're like, no, beep, like, that's why we're here. We want to learn things and we want to ask questions. But it's important to keep this in mind, right? There are things that we know, there are things that we observe, right, and explain to ourselves based on previous experience and knowledge that we've gained, right? And that helps us identify what we don't know. And then filter through all of that crap that we don't know, right? And filter and sort and sift and say, there are some things I still don't really want to know about. I just don't have the time, I don't have the inclination, I don't have the skill set. But there are things that I do want to learn more about, that I do want to find out about, right? And it's a process, and that's okay, right? So I use physics as an example a lot of the time, right? I would love to be a physicist. Secret, not even secret, it's a passion that I have. I will never be a physicist. I am rubbish at math. Failed it twice in high school, actually. Right? So it's okay to be bad at things. So I have to justify, right? When people are like, what do you want to do with your life? And I'm like, well, I want to learn, I want to study. But not astrophysics, because that would just be an embarrassment to that academic discipline, and it would lead me to, want to jump off the Waterloo Bridge. So we need to figure out what we're going to investigate, right? And then we're going to find a way, right, to investigate, right, a phenomenon, a theory or concept, right, in a way that matches the methods we intend to use to collect and analyze and interpret data. Yeah? So there are ramifications for phrasing a question in a certain way. Yeah? and kind of more detailed and knowledgeable and kind of explicit your statement, your research question becomes, the better able your reader, right? The better able your reader will be to evaluate whether or not you've actually accomplished what your study set out to do. And that is very important, right? Because with your dissertation, you get your supervisor who you spend 9 lovely months communicating with and refining your question and all of these things. And so when it comes time for them to mark this, even though it's all anonymized, we can say, aha! Right? But then it goes to a second marker who has no idea who you are, no idea what you've been doing for 9 months, and really is not that invested in whether or not you pass or fail. Right? And if they're sitting there being like, right, that's terrible. You don't want that. Yeah? So you need to, or even worse than that, they're saying like, but you said you were gonna, and then you did. You don't want the people marking your work to make those kinds of noises. Yeah? So, depending on how we intend to carry out our investigation, right, we're either going to express what we intend to investigate, right, in this kind of broad way. There's a phenomenon that we're interested in. There's a theory we hope to learn about, right? There's a group of people we would like to talk to and kind of describe their habits, right? Or we're going to test and measure something, right? Testing and measuring, that involves some math. I did pass many statistics classes, so I am good at testing and measuring things, right? This is wonderful, right? And so these are two kind of broad ways of thinking about research. There's qualitative research, right, that happens a lot in the humanities and social science, right? But then there's also quantitative methods, which we usually associate, right, with, again, some facets of social science, right? And then a lot of the physical and hard sciences, right, like math and chemistry and physics. Like I said, I'm really envious of the physicists, right? But there is a third kind of path that I haven't put up here for a reason, right? You're saying that, well, we can use statistics to contextualize, right, our observations about people, right? If we can't say the whole world, right, because we don't, 9 months, you can't talk to everyone in the whole world. That's, I'm sorry, no matter how many hours you spend on research, there's no way to do that. But if you can say, I spoke to, 1,000 people out of a population of 10,000 people, right, that's great. You are measuring, to some degree, the relevance and scope of your research, right? But then you can also use, right, what you've investigated and described in depth, right, to help us understand, right, a population, those 1,000 people that you spoke to, and then a percentage of that population that said yes and a percentage of that population said no, right? So we also have mixed methods, right? But you have to be able to express qualitative and quantitative questions in order for a mixed method study to happen, right? So you do need to understand the differences between these. And this, again, might sound very obvious, but a good research question is specific, right? So I use one of my core students from 2 years ago as an example here, right? It took us about a month to get down. Victoria's going to know what I'm saying here, right? Shen, or Shen, comes into my office and he says, I know what I will do for my dissertation. I'm like, that's great. I'm going to study the internet in China. And I'm like, okay. And his follow-up, right, as I'm like sitting there looking at him, he goes, don't worry, I speak Chinese. Brilliant. Okay. That's, no. Right, so we have to narrow this down, right? And so he's like, don't worry, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to explain how Chinese people come on vacation in London. And I'm like, we don't need to explain how they come on vacation in London. Right? There are travel agencies, there are anthropologists, there are ethnographers that do all of this for us. You're not asking a question. You have become more specific, but you're not asking a question. So then it became a conversation of, well, we know what you want to investigate, so let's identify some variables. Right? Let's identify the phenomenon and the activities and the tools and technologies that we need to investigate. So it turned into a, how do people, right, Chinese people between the ages of 18 and 25 use Airbnb to plan their vacations to London, right? He didn't know, I didn't know, and that's great. it was more specific, but he wasn't answering his question, right, by posing this question, right? We call that a rhetorical question. Yeah, that's not good, right? Because you're not actually investigating something. To use the wonderful phrase from my colleague and your teacher, Brittany Kelly, research should not entrench your biases. It should test and expand, right, your ability to interpret the world around you. Yeah, and that's not easy, but it is fun. So, there are different kinds of questions that we can ask ourselves. Yes? We call these interrogatives. I love rhetoric, and I love grammar. It says rarely does it love me back, though, so don't worry. Right, so when we ask who, right, by saying who will, or who has, or who is responsible, these kinds of things, it helps us identify individuals, groups, and organizations as our research variable. And I say variable, right, as that unit of analysis, that subject of our inquiry. Variables are important, right? There are many different ways that we can discuss them, but that's more advanced for later, right? So we can look at a question, right? At The Guardian, who is responsible for implementing GAM technologies? Right? We might find out that it's a network of people within the Guardian service, right? But by asking who from the outset, right, we're interested in thinking about a person's role within an organization. Right? That has a qualitative kind of connotation and implication. We're not measuring their success, right? We're not counting individuals and saying what percentage of the Guardian staff is involved in this, right? But we're interested in who, right? And we can follow that up with how do they go about their daily lives, right? Their work and their experiences. How have they managed to accomplish, right, achieving this position, and how and to what degree, right, does this affect workflows and kinds of projects that are going on there, right? And then we can also ask what, right? This allows us to identify phenomena, right, activities, behaviors, we can kind of fill in here, as our research variable, right? So again, variable, the subject, right, or unit that we are analyzing. Yeah? So, again, this has a qualitative kind of connotation and implication, right? What factors enabled the widespread adoption of TEI in the paleographic community between 1990 and 1995? Right, how many of you are from digital humanities? Okay, yeah, TEI, it's the bane of my existence. It's magical, it's wonderful, but it is a little, kind of drives you crazy, right? And between 1990 and 1995 was kind of the 5-year period where digital humanities really emerged through conversations between people working with markup and digital technologies and having adventures with computers, right? So we're asking, right, we're asking a question that is going to help us frame what we want to learn about a particular group of people during a particular period of time, right? So it's not, what has TEI done for the digital humanities? Well, they have like 5-day conferences on that, and no one ever has an answer. Right? I've seen people like get drunk and almost come to blows over like differing opinions. Digital humanities conferences are rowdy, right? So I highly recommend going to some of them. Very professional, very like, you know, nice, but they can get a little contentious. So we can also ask where. Right? And this allows us to think about places, right, as the topic of our investigation, right? And a place can be geographical, right? It can be organizational. Place has many, many different connotations. If you're interested in that, you should talk to Stuart Dunn. He and I are both kind of obsessed with this idea of place and space, right? But where are we more likely to find anti-piracy laws? In developed or developing countries? Now, you will see, this is a rather broad question, right? Because it's assuming that we're interested in piracy and anti-piracy, right? We're interested in laws and activities that help us understand it as a kind of social, political, economic phenomenon, but we don't really know that much. So as you start looking into what is a developed country, right? What kinds of developed countries have piracy laws and anti-piracy laws that are well recognized and talked about, right? And then developing countries, right? What's a developing country, right? How are they reacting to developed countries, right? So you're going to be able to start refining the particular places you want to think about, right? Paraguay. This is what my sister researches, right? But it took her quite a bit of time, 6 years, to really build up the knowledge base for this, right? To be able to say why the United States and Paraguay, right, were places that could be compared and contrasted through research on piracy and anti-piracy laws, right? And the great thing about that is you all can benefit from that research. But it's okay to start broad and narrow down, right? That's what doing research is about, right? And so then when we ask when, right, this allows us to identify events and time as our research variable. Yeah? So when did fake news first become a phenomenon? Right? And we might be thinking, well, usually it's like 2015, all right? No! I will emphatically say that, and whoever deals with lecture capture will be like, wow, that woman is really shrill and adamant about this. Right? But this is allowing you to say, I have a general idea of what I think fake news is, and I want to learn more. Right? I want to see if there's an actual history, right, that we can investigate so that I can contextualize how fake news and our idea of fake news has evolved. And I can identify what the implications are for, the next presidential election in the United States. Yeah? So you're able to combine these interrogatives, right, and develop questions that become increasingly precise, right, in terms of what you're investigating, right, still without answering your question, right, or making your question into kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. Right? So we can also ask why. Right? I kind of had this kind of aversion therapy for why during my master's in library and information science. We're never supposed to ask them, well, why do you want a book? And apparently that's rude. I think it's conversational. It's just kind of a tone you use, like, why do you want this book? Fascinating. Right? And then maybe you have a new book to add to your stack of unread novels next to your nightstand. But that's okay. Right? So why allows us to investigate the importance or impact of a variable. Right? So we're starting to measure and quantify as opposed to explore and contextualize. Right? And that's not a bad thing. It's just a different process. Right? So why might an independent news agency resist implementing a damn system? Yeah. So that, for those of you who are in the MA dam, you'll be like, well, that's stupid and foolish. Everybody needs a dam. Well, they're very expensive, and they're very bossy, and very hard to maintain, right? So you need to kind of think creatively and laterally. And instead of judging and saying, well, your business is going to be a failure, you can say, tell me more. Tell me why. What are the impacts? What are the implications? Who is making this decision? Right? But it all starts, right, by being able to say, why? Why is this important? Right? Then we can also ask how, right? It allows us to investigate the effects of a variable, right? We're assuming that there's some kind of impact, right? And we want to be able to measure that, right? How has GDPR influenced our understanding of privacy? Right? And this is something that I've been thinking about, right? If we're constantly told that the internet is collecting our personal data, right? And we're supposed to be aware of this, and we're supposed to consent to this, and we're supposed to investigate policies and rules and all of these things. But if it's just like this formality of clicking a button, has it really improved the way we manage our data, protect our data? Or it's kind of numb to this, and it's like a pro forma kind of thing we go through. Yeah? So this is, again, like wild speculation based on like personal practices that I have, so I just need to contextualize that. But that is a big question to ask, right? And there are people in our department who have a much more disciplinarily sound approach to investigating that, right? Mark Cote and Jonathan Gray being two of them. They're also lovely people. So the last kind of question that we can ask ourselves, to what extent, right, or the last way we can think about phrasing our question, to what extent, right, this allows us to express our intentions to test a cause and effect relationship between variables, right? And so this implies that you love math and want to do some form of statistical analysis. And that is okay, because statistics are fancy and amazing and make you feel really cool when you finally get them right. But there are some implications for how much data you need, right, and how you justify the analysis that you do. Right, so here, to what extent do election cycles in the United States affect subscriptions to newspapers? Some of you may or may not have noticed that I am an American. And these things cause a great deal of anxiety for me, right? So you could easily swap this out and say, to what extent, right, do discussions about Brexit and MP votes affect newspaper subscriptions in the UK? Right? So you're seeing that there's a kind of formula you can use, right, to phrasing these questions, and then you can kind of take variables out and replace them with other variables that are more appropriate to what you want to do. Right? So you'll notice that these research questions express one particular thing, right? One particular question, or one particular unit of analysis, I should say, right, that you want to investigate. If you have 6 things that you're asking in one question, well, if I'm your supervisor, I'll look at it and be like, well, that's the internet in China. Don't be like Shen, right? Let's work on narrowing this down. Let's improve this so that you actually know what you want to investigate, right? And you can discuss your assumptions, right, your biases, and you can design methods to test them, right? So that question is a bridge between your literature review that frames the phenomenon, right, and your point of view, right, well contextualized, right, and supported by existing research, right, and then methods that will help you test whether or not they're accurate, yeah? So let's practice, right, because I'm a huge fan of students practicing things. Again, people who are in research data management might just want to like curl up and flee. But 5 minutes, right? And so break into pairs, small groups, right? No more than 3. And taking turns, go around and state what you plan to investigate. Does not have to be a perfectly articulated question, right? But just a statement, right? And as you listen to your group mates, right, see if you can identify variables, right, those subjects that you think they're trying to express, right? And then at the end, share those, right, because we're going to use those in the next exercise, yeah? So I'm going to set a timer to keep us on track, yeah? you've had a few minutes to muddle through and start kind of thinking about research, right, and how to phrase a question, we have a follow-up exercise, right? So take a minute or two, right, because again, I'm going to set a timer for this. Take a minute or two to look over the key points, right, the terms, the concepts, the variables that your group mates, right, noted while they were listening to you, right? And then see, right, take another few minutes to see and think about whether or not what they've written down actually matches what you're trying to articulate, yeah? So if these notes are wildly different from what you were trying to think about, like be like, fascinating. What do I do about this, right? And just make note of that process so that when you meet with your dissertation supervisor, you can be like, I'm having a good time figuring out how to articulate this. Let's hash this out, right? But if the ideas match, right, they're slightly different, but they're synonyms, right? That's great. You now have other key words that you can use to search for information, right? So I'm going to set another timer. You'll have some time. You can do this individually, or you can talk with your neighbors, right? Whichever one makes you happiest. you're trying to say, right? Because the kind of golden achievement of any research project is to be able to explain it in 5 minutes or less to a complete stranger, you know? Or somebody who has no idea what you're doing. Yeah? All right, like seriously. It's like a golden kind of like goal that we have. Yeah? And it takes time. But again, we need to start somewhere. Right? So there are 2 things that we've just practiced. Again, expressing what you want to learn, right? And then identifying or refining, right? Or rejecting, choosing new ones, right? Keywords and terms that relate to your research interests, right? And going through a kind of process of peer review, right? You should talk to your friends and colleagues about your research, right? Because they'll either look at you and be like, what the heck? Or they'll be like, yeah, tell me more. Or like, I kind of think I know what you're saying, but not entirely sure. Now, let's see if we can start putting this to good use, right? So, again, 5 minutes. I timed this out. It should work, right? Start practicing using those keywords. And if any of you are in metadata and had a lovely lecture on Boolean operators inflicted on you, disseminate and share that knowledge, right? So, 5 minutes. Then we'll talk about managing these resources and evaluating these resources. a chance, right, to articulate what we want to research, kind of tested whether or not people understand what's happening in our brains, right, and then to actually start the process of looking for information, right, about our topic, right, we need to actually think about our next steps. And this is my moment in time, like the last 10 minutes that I literally have a captive audience to remind you. This process takes time. If you are traveling abroad, right, over the summer, you need to consider whether or not the country you are going to will allow you to access the databases and journals you need, right? I'm serious, right? If I go to Paraguay this summer to visit my sister, I will not have access to King's College, mostly because Paraguay has crap internet, right? But then above and beyond that, Paraguay is known for piracy and issues with, abiding by using the internet ethically. So most firewalls go, no IP address, no! And even if I have a VPN, I'm still not able to access what I want and need. So start the process of looking for journal articles now. Because 2 years ago, I had a student who was interested in learning about in-flight entertainment as a form, right, of advertising. Fascinating, right? It's great. All of her research, right, her secondary research that she used in her literature review was from 1960. That's great. However, her dissertation was not historical. She wanted to talk about Emirates Airlines, right, in 2014 to 2015 and how switching to digital initiatives changed that. 1960, not relevant. Yeah? Very awkward moment when I realized what had happened. She had gone home to Hong Kong and had issues accessing King's College resources that she should have been able to access, right, through the VPNs and all of these nice things and secure FX and all of the login credentials. However, that was not possible. And it was too late. You can't really say, hey, Mom, hey, Dad, can I have $3,000 for a plane ticket so I can go do data collection in the United Kingdom, when I'd already had 4 months to do that before coming home for the summer? Just saying. Plan these things out. Right? So, as you embark on this journey of information seeking and discovery, you should be evaluating what you find. And there are 3 main criteria that I'm going to go through quickly, right, that you can refer back to and think about. Right? Currency, accuracy, and authority. These are not discrete concepts. They interact and influence one another. And as you learn more about a topic, right, as you learn more about resources, right, like journals and databases and books and authors and all of these things, right, you can start refining and improving the way you think about each of these concepts, right? So currency helps you establish whether or not what you're reading about is relevant because it's timely and accurate. I do a lot of historical research. So what's current for me is often from 1890. However, when I'm talking about metadata and authority control, 1890 is not current. I need things from the last 5 years, right? So we can look at when something was published, whether or not a revised and updated edition, right, has become available, right? And is there a more recent resource that we can look to and think about, right? So we can also think about accuracy. Now, this is not as subjective as Donald Trump would like us to think. Fake news is, I'm sorry, it's really impossible not to use him as a foil in these conversations. It just is, right? We can think about general and popular consensus, right? Climate change is a thing. Reputable scientists agree on this, and everyone but a few really dumb Americans agree, right? So are there information resources that help us delve into why popular consensus is valid, right? And then how we can affirm this, right, through scientific data and scholarly research, right? And as we're doing that, we should actually pay attention to things that contradict and maybe challenge this point of view, right? Because blind faith usually leads to some pretty embarrassing assumptions that we do not want to appear in a scholarly piece of work. It's okay to acknowledge the limitations of an idea or concept, right, or a data set, right, or a method. That's important, right, because it demonstrates, right, that research is ongoing, right, and your understanding will improve with time and reflection and revision, right? We can also think about authority, right, and currency and accuracy contribute to authority, right? It's not just saying, I have a PhD, so I know things, right, but it's contextualizing and explaining the process you went through, right, to establish and validate, right, and review and revise and contextualize your opinion, right, both within a disciplinary community, right, so if I'm an astrophysicist, I want to think about what other astrophysicists have to say about my research, right, and then also whether or not your research has value and merit to future research, to say, hey, I found something really cool and interesting, and I'm going to do more research and I'm going to continue thinking about this. And then I know other people, maybe from my discipline, maybe from other disciplines, will also find this interesting and be able to make sense of what I've said, right? So again, we can look at how people contextualize the scope and aim of their research, right? We can also look at whether or not an author acknowledges the limitations of their research. There is nothing more obnoxious than somebody says, this is the definitive text. I automatically go, really? I don't believe you. Especially when it's an old dead white dude. I'm just like, no. But that's, again, my liberal feminist bias coming into all of these things, right? And then do the authors address opposing views? This is important, right? Because it shows they're aware of their status and position within an academic community, right? And acknowledging that research, no matter how thorough, no matter how fantastic, is still sparked by an opinion, an observation that was made from a particular point of view at a particular point of time in a particular place. Yeah? And that's important, and it's okay. But we need to understand the limitations for that. Yeah? So, we can think about how these are some information-seeking tips to just kind of wrap up on a high note. Right? We can look at titles, right, for possible keywords. I should probably move this slide sooner. There's another lecture tonight, so I'll be doing that for them. Right? We can look at a title for a source of keywords. Right? We can look and see whether or not an author has provided keywords. Many journals and monographs require authors submit keywords. Conference proceedings do as well, right? And then we can look and see, right, whether or not the resource we're looking at has a bibliography or an index. And we can use that bibliography, right? As an author, we're like, yeah, I love you. I want to be your friend. This is fantastic. You changed my life, right? What you can do is flip to the back. Right, say like, ooh, you've read all of these things? I'm going to go read these things too. Yeah? It's very helpful, and it cuts down on the amount of original kind of seeking and research you have to do. Yeah? Okay. So, and then as you go through this process, make sure that you are taking notes and thinking about what you're doing. Right? That you're writing down references, that you're writing down the key points an author is making, that you're writing your reactions to these things, and that you're actually going back and reviewing and revising this as you learn more, right? Because what you thought was super useful at the beginning, it might not be at the end. It's sad, it's true, it happens to me all the time, right? But you should still acknowledge, right, that you've done that research, right? So these are the 4 points, right, that you can kind of take into consideration to help you manage your resources. And just remember that this whole process takes time. Don't put it off until June and July. We don't want to hear from you in June and July about, I don't know what my topic is. No, we want to hear, I have a topic, and I'm ready to collect data. Huh? Right, because that's a whole nother process that we're there to help you with. And in August, we want to hear the, would you mind looking over a draft and giving me some light touch revision and editorial help? Not a, well, I think I found a new topic that I'm more interested in. Don't. Like, that's just, right? So, and then just continue on in this process and realize that you're going to learn a lot, right? And it's going to take time to figure out how to articulate this. That's okay. It's part of the adventure. It's my favorite part of teaching. Yeah?